Hello, all. I'm Oliver Kragelund. I was born and raised in Iowa, moved around as a child before I joined the United States Marine Corps. After the Marine Corps, I got into working with butcher shops and then eventually switched over into grain elevator operations, where I moved out here to Illinois to run a grain elevator in Atlanta. I was managing the grain elevator there in Atlanta, Illinois. We were getting ready for harvest in August, middle of August, cleaning out grain bins, getting prepped up for the upcoming harvest. As everybody's well aware, it's a busy time of year, and grain bins are naturally fairly dangerous. Uh, Frankly, I probably shouldn't have been inside that grain bin on that Monday morning. Weekend, I received news that my grandmother had passed away. Not unexpectedly, but I probably was not in the best mental state to be going to work that day, but I didn't know what else to do. So, like a lot of everybody else, when you don't know what to do, you go through your motions and you just go to work. And I knew the dangers of everything, like most of us do. We had a crew of, I want to say 4 to 5 guys. It's been about 3.5 years. And we had a guy at the door. We're following our proper safety protocols. All but we, for whatever reason or another, and I as a manager, and I should have known better, forgot to put a protective grate over the sump holes inside the grain. And we were in there all day. We were actually wrapping up, and because I like to be lead from the front, we just had the last little bit of sweeping to do inside the grain bin. I told the rest of the guys to get out and start handling off to something else while I finished up the last little bit of sweeping. And on just the thinnest little layer of soybeans right by one of the sump holes, I slipped, and my right foot went into the sump hole, got caught inside of a paddle drag, much like a screw auger, only it's a giant chain, and it started to eat my foot. Luckily, we were following literally every other safety protocol but the one that would have prevented my foot going into the piece of equipment. And had a guy stationed at a door, had a guy stationed near the shutoff. Pretty much once I went in and started yelling, the guy at the door yelled to shut things off, and it couldn't have been more than but a few seconds before they got everything shut down. At that point, I'm inside this is a steel grain bin, which it would have been nice if I was inside one of these, because it would have made getting me out a lot easier. Mine had some unique challenges. It was an old concrete silo. So, couldn't just cut through the floor to get me out, at least out of the piece of equipment, because there's about 2.5 foot of concrete, and couldn't just cut a hole in the door or go out through a door like this, nice at ground level. It was a raised entry, about 5 foot off the ground. So we had some unique challenges to get me out. Once paramedics got on site, I was conscious. And because of both military training from the Marine Corps and being the manager of the location, I was the most knowledgeable in helping them get me out. So I assisted as much as I could with extracting myself, which ended up having to cut the chain that my foot was wedged, sump hole, foot underneath of concrete, chain on the underside pinning my foot in there. So you had to cut the chain on one end of the paddle drag and come along to the other half of the paddle drag. And as you pull the chain out, you had to pull me out with it nice and slow. I believe the extraction process took 2 to 3 hours to fully get me out of that bin. From the time I went in, paramedics getting on site, tourniquet, and a bunch of applications. At which point I was medevac'd to Peoria Hospital, and luckily, again, still conscious. I got to have a discussion with my doctor before going into surgery, at which point I knew the second my foot went into that it was probably not going to be savable. And thankfully, being awake, I got to have a discussion with my doctor, letting him know that I knew it was likely just time to amputate. And like all doctors do, they'll be a little more optimistic and tell you that, we won't know until we get in there and everything like that. But I pretty much told my doctor to amputate my foot because I knew that I'd made a mistake, and I'm lucky to be alive, but it cost me my foot. Life after the injury has obviously been different. Immediately following it, as an active guy, I used to run 5Ks. I was working in grain elevators, did some combat sports, things like that. It killed me, like it would kill any farmer or anybody that uses their body to work, to just sit around and wait to heal. It took about the better part of 9 months. It took the initial amputation, and I had one follow-up surgery to deal with some infection and some complications with healing. And about 9 months before I was fully, quote-unquote, healed, all of the internals were back together, and I no longer had an open wound and things like that. At that point, we waited just a little bit longer before going to get to speak with a prosthetist about getting a prosthetic limb. Thankfully, I was young. Thankfully, I'm healthy otherwise, which unfortunately isn't the case for a lot of farmers. A lot of farmers in my position likely aren't going to have what I am looking forward to moving forward, because I'm young and healthy and ambitious and able to pursue walking. Talked to a prosthetist and got my first limb at about a year and 3 months after the initial injury, at which point I started physical therapy to relearn how to walk and to start conditioning my body again after almost a full year of sitting around. I was on crutches and semi-active, but the majority of the time I was fairly sedentary. So getting back into the process of relearning how to walk, it gave me something to shoot for, which was a relief. I had a goal, and I had something I could do about it. I could actually do something about learning how to walk, which helped a lot with my mental state. Within, I want to say, about 3 months, I was able to move to walking mostly unassisted. I still carried a walking stick just in case. And at about 6 months, I was fully unassisted. Still have pain. Have had phantom pains for about 2 years. They've luckily gone away for me. I no longer deal with the phantom pains, but I do still have a decent amount of discomfort, especially after a long day. Because again, I'm younger, I'm active, I want to be active. So some days I overdo it. The biggest change for me has been reworking my future career. This has obviously been a setback for me. My goal was to get into grain elevators and work my way up through that system, and I did. I started grain elevators knowing not much. My father ran grain elevators. I knew what the job was, but had never actually done it. Within a couple years, I'd gotten to management, and I was hoping to continue in that process, maybe moving into a regional position, or dealing with truck loadouts or marketing of grains eventually, stuff like that. This has obviously changed that path for me. I'm now doing something I never thought I would do. I'm pursuing a college education that I used to think was a little bit of a waste of time, with the end goal of eventually pursuing a career in agriculture safety, which is going to be a hard push because I know how farmers are, I know how the industry is, and a lot of folks don't like to spend money on safety because safety doesn't make money directly. I argue that if you don't get hurt and you have less accidents and less injuries and less fatalities in our industry, everybody's better off for it, including yourself.